The series you've been waiting for has arrived on Disney+.
Where do we start?
Critics have been raving about The Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
I got a vibranium arm, and I can fly. Let's get to work.
It's a pulse-pounding experience that will leave you breathless.
Well, this is too perfect.
Marvel Studios is bringing feature film caliber storytelling to Disney+.
Sure about that? Damn right. Let me hear you.
Marvel Studios, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, now streaming only on Disney+.
You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions. This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/intotheportal.
Hello, everybody. I'm Amber Ray.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And welcome back into the portal, your gateway to the bizarre. We got a brand new Film Friday for you guys.
First one of the year. And it's already March.
We literally just had a laugh attack just realizing that we're already like in the final week and a half of March.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Whatever, we're kicking off spring with a Film Friday. We'll call it that because it's, I think it was the first day of spring, like yesterday or today or something like that.
We're just springing into the new year.
Oh, yeah. Great,
right?
Great stuff.
Is that a good one?
That's great stuff.
We have a really fun classic film for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of I would call it a fringe film too. I didn't know about this one until we started looking into our Black Eyed Kids episode for Patreon.
Yes.
This is actually from the 60s, 1960 on the dot. Village of the Damned. Pretty spooky.
Yeah.
So basically this is a British film. It's classified as a sci-fi horror film, of course, directed by none other than Wolf Rieler.
What a name.
Yeah, and it was also written by him as well, the screenplay, along with Sterling Silliphant and Ronald Knuch, who was also the producer. But yeah, no, it's got kind of a small cast, that's pretty typical for a movie of this era, but it's effective. So we've got our main four, I'll say. George Sanders playing Professor Gordon Zellaby. Mm-hmm. We have his wife, or girlfriend, as she's also called, Barbara Shelley, who plays Anthea Zellaby. Mm-hmm. And then we've got what's known as the main child leader of this film, and that's played by Martin Stevens. So he plays David Zellaby. And then, last but certainly not least, Michael Gwynn playing Alan Bernard, who is the army brother-in-law. He's like the sergeant dude.
You're right.
So, yeah, this is a pretty epic film.
Yes.
I really enjoyed this. It's highly entertaining. It's not slow like a lot of films from this era can be. It picks up right away and engages you.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously everyone listening knows that that's what I love, like get right into it right away. And the tagline of the film right off the top is "Beware the stare that will paralyze the will of the world." And obviously I love that. That's great.
That should have been Rasputin's tagline.
No doubt. Maybe they kind of had a little bit of that inspired by him.
Maybe.
But I love how, what's interesting, I should say right off the bat, how it's emphasizing the stare, because the aspect of the eyes and the stare and controlling of the mind definitely comes into play, which also is related to the research we were doing into the phenomena of the black-eyed children, which is an interesting comparison that we wanted to make with this film.
Totally, like these weird, unnatural, mesmeric eyes that in this film, they're not black, obviously, but they are, there's some special effects applied to them, and when they get into their mesmeric zone, I'll say, it is actually quite effective. It's actually quite spooky, I think.
Yeah.
Like, it's obviously very basic, but
it gives you that same vibe, though, of exactly of a black-eyed child experience, though.
Exactly.
Which to us, being like, armchair paranormal researchers, I'll call us, is something we're obviously familiar with, as more of a modern phenomena. Perhaps this film inspired, I think, is what some people would point to. But we'll get to that. The story takes place in Midwich, England, which is, of course, a fictitious town. It's not a real place. I was hoping it might be a middle place. A middle place. A real place.
It's like a sandwich, but it's in the middle.
Right.
It's the Midwich.
It's describing the middle of the sandwich. Exactly.
Yeah, it's the Midwich. It's not the bread. It's everything between the bread.
Right. Also, this town is primed to have a witch, like the Midwich witch.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it just makes sense, right? But in this case, they're experiencing something else other than witch phenomena in the woods. The film is actually based on an earlier novel written in 1957 called The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. And it's a science fiction novel, just like the film ends up being. And it tells a tale of this, obscure English village in which women become pregnant by something I'm actually going to save. I'm not going to say it right now because I want to get into it in a little bit. But they do get bizarrely impregnated by something mysterious, right? The film kicks off, and I was so excited because right off the bat, I'm like, "That's Monsieur Ballon! That's Monsieur Ballon from the Pink Panther!" It's the
original Pink Panther.
Yes, the first one, A Shot in the Dark. The guy who plays the millionaire Frenchman, Monsieur Ballon, and he of course is playing Professor Zellaby. And you're right, it is really effective right from the beginning because like the professor answers the phone, he's sitting in his office, but there's something that's keeping him from his communication, right? And the cinematography is really effective. It keeps cutting around as we're slowly realizing that wherever the professor is and his surrounding space is like being affected by something sinister. And they go to these really close-up shots of like a telephone from here sign where clearly no one's able to call for help, solo clothes iron on a table, just really close-up shot, burning the clothes, a skipping record that keeps like repeating the same creepy thing over and over and over and over again. So it really like builds up to like the creepy stuff right away, which is awesome.
Well, and evidently there's just bodies littered everywhere.
Right.
In
and
streets, in their houses, everywhere. Everyone's
Yes.
just seemingly collapsed.
Yeah. And we don't really know if all of them are gonna get up or what's
What is
exactly going on, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely effective. And the army's on the scene like right away. So it was almost like Flatwoods Monster style. You know what I mean?
And the reason for that is
Right.
because on the other end of the phone, the professor, he was actually on the phone with the Army Major Bernard, who is his brother-in-law.
Right. Right. And he's concerned enough to have all of them descend and make that happen like right away. I mean, obviously it is strange. I guess he would.
Well, the thing is, he's cut off from his communication initially. He's in his office, right, at the main army headquarters, wherever that is, in central England, somewhere. And then he is attempting to reestablish communication and can't. So he is increasingly concerned. He has the afternoon off, so he requests that he go investigate, which is kind of nice that you don't have to travel like hours and hours and hours to get to where they are. But yeah, I thought that was interesting, right? There's a very intimate connection right away.
Yeah.
And it establishes this very official line, right? All extending all the way back to the military, like heads and all that. So there's a very interesting component that adds more to this film.
Totally, because it almost made me wonder right off the bat, is this a military like mistake of some kind? Like, is he also like, I'm gonna go make sure to, I gotta go find out what's going on because maybe we're at fault.
Some kind of cover up or something gone wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And of course he pulls up right away and it's all chaos, right? So it's like he rolls up because he's gonna go check out what's happening in Midwich, and he sees an oncoming van that just has the driver and passenger completely passed out. They just like veer into the ditch. A policeman on a bicycle. Similar situation. It's just bizarre. People are just like dropping like flies.
Exactly, because that was the interesting part. So he's at a certain threshold. He's in the road. He sees it from a bit of a distance. Him and the policeman have an exchange, and the policeman, because he's on a bike, right, he decides to go up to the passed out people, and then as soon as he crosses a threshold, he himself just falls over.
Exactly.
And so obviously something is happening where the atmosphere's been affected or contaminated or something.
Right.
So it's very clear to this one individual that this is not normal.
And before Major Bernard like goes and even realizes this, he says to the captain, he says like, we have men running some kind of drills, was it? Like around the area of Midwich, like he makes reference to that.
So we think
strange.
That right away, hey, that is some sort of military connection, that there's something sinister or not quite open to the public.
What did he mean by this, right? Exactly.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point.
And then of course we get the classic old-fashioned like military quarantine. Everybody, they quarantine the town. It's this bubble that's created, and we still don't know exactly what's going on. But as they send in a man like with a gas mask this time, And I love it how they ask the guy, he's like, oh, are you cool with this? And he's basically, yeah, no problem. Like, puts the gas mask on. And, his vitals are sound, no big deal, which is absolutely bizarre. They drag him back across the threshold. And he says, as soon as he starts to come to, he says, I'm so cold. That's another weird clue that they kind of like give you early on as a teaser. Why are you cold?
What is happening to you, like, biologically or physically in that moment? It is weird.
Yeah.
It's not as if, like, there's nothing, like, it's not like they're frozen, literally.
And it's like spring. It's like a warm, beautiful day, presumably. Like, the people driving and out and about, like, no one's dressed for winter. Like, it's warm. And
clearly summer, yeah.
Yeah, so it's strange. It's almost like he's been drained of something, right? Or petrified in a way. Like, I guess your blood's just run cold because you're scared for some reason, but he can't really describe why.
He almost just seems more out of it than scared.
Right, exactly. And of course, the out of itness continues. This is almost comedic. Like, you and I both laughed out loud, and then we looked at each other. We're like, should we? Was that? That's pretty dark. Morbid sense of humor we have because they decide to send a plane in, thinking.
They don't actually. He just sees it overhead.
Oh, right. He radios
him, and then he's basically just like, let's do a test here.
Right.
And so he asked the pilot, who's just an average Joe Blow pilot.
No. It was a military plane.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't?
No.
Are you sure?
Well, we'd have to go back and rewatch it, but I'm pretty sure that it was just some dude in his own little single whatever, like Cessna style thing. But yeah, I could be wrong. Anyone correct?
It really doesn't matter.
But it's just interesting. The interesting part is the idea that he is at an altitude that is seemingly safe, and then Bernard, the major guy, he asks him to descend, and then as soon as he hits a certain threshold, he ends up passing out.
Right.
You know what's really unfair about that scene is how little warning this pilot's being given that his life is basically in limb, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just
they don't know. I mean, they're
true, yeah. And the major guy, he does make the point of saying, like, if you start to feel funny, and he's like, what do you mean feel funny? And then as soon as he hits that threshold, he just passes out. And then we get a very comedic crash and burn in the forest.
It's just like you weren't expecting it. All of a sudden, just the plane crashes.
The looks on their faces.
And everyone's like, oh God, like, seriously? But of course, now we're left with this question because the reason they thought that wouldn't be a problem, like, I wouldn't have thought that in that situation either, right? It's like, this has got to be they wouldn't expect it to be this massive biome, essentially, where, like, whatever is affecting Midwich goes up into the, miles up.
Or is it simply descending from the upper echelons of our atmosphere? And that pilot, if you flew past, like, say, like, maybe 20 minutes before this hit the ground, maybe you would have been affected by it if it is spore-like, as we theorize. Because that's what I'm thinking. It's like some sort of, like, psychic or perhaps biological spore-like parasite. But I'm getting ahead of myself here.
Oh, yeah, way ahead of yourself.
Getting way out of myself here. But, yeah, the idea that you're talking about this biome. So this thing extends vertically and horizontally. It's a three-dimensional sort of, like, sphere that we're dealing with here.
Well, why don't we get to the point here where the townsfolk wake up?
Yes.
And they're like, what the hell's going on?
Exactly. So, again, we get the professor in his home kind of, like, coming to, and he doesn't quite realize it at first, but his wife enters and she starts to, like, piece it together, like, oh, it's already 3:00. Oh, why did you miss lunch?
Right.
Why didn't you come wake me from my nap? And then they start to realize they've lost several hours.
Yeah.
The entire town of Midwich has been cut off from the outside world for, we don't have an exact amount of time, but it's several hours. So it probably happened in the morning, and then by about 3 p.m. is when they all come to. So, again, we get a lot of infiltration, a lot of presence of the military in the town as it descends with these scientific intentions. And of course, we get the personal connection between the major and the fact that it's like, you know, his brother-in-law is a professor, a man of science, right?
Right.
Someone you would go to in a situation like this. So he becomes sort of like the preeminent, like, expert of the town, right? And observing all this weird phenomena.
But isn't that interesting, too, that they descend so quickly with these scientific intentions? Like, obviously, it's this personal connection, but it's also, like, going back to that comment early on, where it's like, weren't we doing some training around Midwich or whatever? They're right there on the scene, ready to go, testing for what the hell's going on. It's very strange. It seems sort of coincidental. It's very Flatwoods Monster-esque. Everyone was ready to go.
It is,
you know?
Yeah, totally. Everyone's been mobilized, and they don't even know what they're dealing with. There's no real evidence of anything.
Right.
until we start to get these women coming forward with these pregnancies. And some of them are obviously happy about it because they're married. Others, not so much. And there's some comedic moments, right? Like the guy that comes home from being away overseas for 18 months and his wife is pregnant.
Right.
Like, that's just...
And she's denying that she did anything, which of
and
course
it
she
just
didn't.
ruins their household. And then there's the unwed teenager that's also pregnant. So basically every woman in this town is impregnated.
Right.
So we get a lot of pregnancies happening here.
And there was and they emphasize that by having that quote from, I didn't actually pull it up here, but they have a line from like the Reverend, because all these girls are going to the church, or a lot of them, and like making confessionals, especially like the younger ones, right? And he ends up talking to Professor Zellaby later on, but he says like, I believe these women, like I believe what they're saying.
Yeah.
And that's that's obviously significant in a community like that, at that in the time period that we're dealing with for this film, which is just kind of interesting. It's like, well, what the hell's going on here? Like, what would a religious man be thinking? You know what I mean? It's because there is these sort of similarities with like, well, it's clearly a virgin birth happening here, but it's not exactly the same vibes as Mary in the stable. It's a little more insidious than that.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, how did this occur? When did this insemination like happen? Is this like the virgin birth, where it is from? Yeah. Like, there's so many different ways that these people could dissect the situation, and obviously we don't know even if they're going to give birth to real human babies, right?
Right. Yeah.
So then we get, on top of the pregnancies, we get abnormal pregnancies. So these women go through an expedited pregnancy, essentially. Right. And so they basically give birth early, and then they give birth to things that are very interesting in their development. So let's get into that. But first, I think we have a quick promo break, don't we, Andrew?
We do indeed. Yes, we're going to take a quick promo break to listen to the ladies over at the Harpy Hour podcast.
Hey everyone, you're invited to Harpy Hour! I'm Tracy. I'm Liz. I'm Steph. We are the Harpies, and Harpy Hour is our new podcast featuring ridiculous stories in history, science, and entertainment.
Were you ever suspicious that pigeons were secretly spying on you?
How do you know who to eat first if you survive a shipwreck? Do problematic musicals send you into an uncontrollable rage?
If so, then Harpy Hour might be your new favorite podcast. That's HARPY for Harpy, and new episodes air every Tuesday wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can also find us on all social media at Harpy Hour Pod. And check us out on harpyhourpodcast.com. Okay, bye!
All right, and we're back. Okay, so we've got up to the point of when these things have been brought into the world.
Yes, indeed.
And we get several birth scenes. They all happen basically within like hours, if not days of each other.
Yeah.
And they all come out as these quote unquote perfect babies that are like just a little off. There's too perfect.
Yes.
They're all biologically sound. They're all healthy.
Right.
They're all born very heavy.
Yeah.
So that's strange. And they're all born with eyes that are mesmeric and are very powerful and strange, as their doctors and parents seem to comment on. So this is an interesting development, and it only gets weirder and weirder as the plot progresses. But we've got a lot of things at play so far here, so maybe let's just recap quickly.
Yeah, okay, for sure. So essentially, like, as far as trying to dissect this, we've got the idea of military experiments, right? The military's present right from Jump Street. They say that they were in the area doing stuff. Is there unknown biological experiments going on? You know, is there some sort of mutation thing going on? Is there alien technology that's been recovered by the military that's been tampered with? Something along those lines that has a biological component to it. Just rabbit hole after rabbit hole of the mind can go down, right?
Like X-Files before the X-Files.
Exactly. Then obviously, like, to build off of that, there's this idea of alien and UFO activity over the town. You know, there's similarities to, even to go to the thing of like everyone wakes up and they're like, oh, it's 3 p.m. What the heck? Well, the notion of lost time is so directly linked to UFO cases, abduction cases, and that phenomena. So is this like literally, you know, inseminations during like a frozen period of time? Or is it, like Amber said, some sort of a strange pollination happening. And once again, as usual, on Into the Portal, X-Files reference, perfect timing, because it's like sort of similar to the episodes in later seasons with like the bees and the cloning of children and using that for some sort of pollination thing. Hybridization, and that's what we're getting here. Hybrid beings.
Exactly. Hybridization, and something that is of a colony like mind, like a hive mind, so to speak. And I had this little thing here. It's just like, they've been seeded. It's like they're bell sprouts, or like they've been attacked by bell sprouts. Like, you know what I mean? Where it's like, yeah, they have been infected or cross-pollinated with some sort of unknown species.
Right.
And then I had to put in all caps, the invasion is here.
Hell yeah.
We're already, yeah, it does remind me a lot of the X-Files themes, where they talk about even like Scully and that group of women that come forward at, I can't remember if it's season 3 or 4.
It's something like
somewhere
that.
in the mid-season.
Someone hit us up and let us know.
Yeah, where there's stories of women that have given birth to these hybrids that eventually are taken back by the government.
Right.
This is interesting though. Yeah, we get a lot of X-Files-esque things with government involvement. However, I will say this, it's a different type of government involvement where it's very open, it's very like solicitous, like, you know, it's not like in the shadows, so to speak.
No.
So there's that, and it's very just English, doesn't it? Just, it's almost like a quaint, like, we're all just here trying to figure this out.
I think, and that's the reason why,
we're
right?
not denying this, we're just kind of here.
Yeah, we're all scratching our heads at the same time. The cook, the baker, the army general, everyone's out here. No, like actually, like that's the vibe of it. But to go back to the whole X-Files comparison, the bees and like the idea of pollination, some sort of an entity that's doing that. The idea of these things coming out early, like born early, born heavy, abnormally heavy, and born as like perfect, air quoting here, perfect, quote unquote, human babies, that just sounds like the perfect symmetry you like see in nature. You know what I mean? Like the honeycombs, like the perfect like shapes of things. It sounds like something mimicking, and then this is what you get. It's too perfect because it's some sort of a parasite or whatever what have you, that is manipulating what would be a human baby, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of is because it's coming out of a human woman, so it's partly that.
It's partly human.
So that's where you would get like the, I don't even know, like the genetic makeup to be able to mimic it. I'm thinking The Thing here, people. There's some comparisons, there's some crossover with that because it's taking the form of something that it normally wouldn't be.
Exactly. And you do get subtle aberrations such as their hair, their odd fingernails, the eyes, and of course, like we've mentioned already, their advanced development. So there are anomalies present within this sort of fusion of unknown species and human species, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
And the other thing too that I will mention is that they're very sterile. They're very cold in their behaviors, in their words, and their actions, and how they relate to other humans around them. And the one thing that was the most obvious in that example is no love for their mothers. It is a classic parasite analogy. You use the host, you discard the host, no longer functional for them, so ergo don't care at all.
Right.
And they have no need for human emotion, right? So they just don't even go there. And I don't love this, but I just thought this was a very powerful portrayal, I guess, of the love that the mother Anthea has for her son David, who totally rejects her time and again. And it's very painful in some scenes, right, where she's just, you know, ultimately rejected. And her femininity is also used against her too, and you know, the classic portrayal is like weak, ineffectual. There's one scene in particular that I had to point out that was one of the second to last confrontations between David and Professor Zellaby in their home, where David comes to speak directly to the professor, who had nothing to do with his mother at all, and is almost uncomfortable in the sense that you think that he might actually do something to her, you know what I mean, something dangerous, but she's dismissed from the room by both of them, the professor and son in air quotes here, before their actual conversation begins. And that's like a classic misogynistic kind of like portrayal, I think. It does speak to the era of film and culture. So I will just point that out too. But I thought that was interesting. Hey, it's so parasitic. Well,
I'd say that, I mean, it's definitely worth mentioning. I'm glad you did. I'd say like literally every aspect of this movie, women have zero agency. The movie is completely centered around being seeded by some sort of anomalous parasitic alien entity against your will. So that's just basically where we're going from there.
Passive feminine. Yeah, exactly. It's a big eye roll, but again, right, it does speak to the nature of these beings, I guess, or creatures, or whatever the hell you want to call them.
And then what you just described too, the situation with David coming in and almost dismissing his mother as if he's an adult, is part of many scenes and experiences in the film that are very similar to the phenomena of the black-eyed children, acting strangely older than they should be, saying things that are anachronistic or out of date and things like that.
Yeah, they're little grown-ups, little human grown-ups or something. And that is actually, so that goes in part and parcel with their accelerated development, I would say. And we get a very interesting scene where there's this box that the professor uses to kind of observe these irregularities and these expedited abilities. So we're going back to the idea of like a hive mentality, because he demonstrates how there's this like complex box that you have to open in a certain way.
Right.
And he teaches it to one in one room, and then as soon as he teaches it to one, they all know it. They can all repeat it without even being shown. So that again speaks to the idea that they have one mind. Right. And they're not individuals. So that's creepy in my opinion, and very effective. This whole movie was so effective in its creepiness, I think.
And the creepy thing about that too is the fact that we know that that's a real thing. You know what I mean? Like that is a real biological phenomena.
Whether or not it's like psychic transmission or whatever.
It's
like
something that we can.
Proven,
but it happens. We know it. Like
even with bamboo and the root systems of plants and things like that. As an
mushrooms,
example,
absolutely. They mushrooms specifically, like fungi. But bugs like bees and ants and things like it's spooky.
And also the idea, the hive mentality, because they walk around together, right? They're always together. They're never really separated if they can help it. They ignore the other children. They, they're literally like, it almost reminds me of the black-eyed kids in the sense that they almost do the right angle turns, and they're all very just in unison. And their eyes, when one of them gets it in their mind that they want to use this psychic abilities, we'll call it, because we get a few different examples of that, and some of them are more nefarious than others. But once one of them decides to do it, it's almost like they all power up together, and they all work together to achieve the desired effect.
And I guess part of that desired effect is like half of it is trying to fit in, but it just sort of doesn't quite. It's like the puzzle piece. It is a puzzle piece, but it doesn't. It's the wrong spot. You know what I mean? Because they dress they dress really well. Yeah. Like, and again, that's similar to the black-eyed children, but I look at that as being like, well, if you're a weird alien spore entity, like, wouldn't you just dress the same but just be wearing like a gray paper bag or something? Like, what's with the actual like? Maybe that's just because it's a UK-based film.
Or maybe they're just trying to do it better. We're like, we're good humans, but we're better.
We're gonna like RuPaul it up and like just look way better than you. Yeah,
it's like
maybe.
They're trying to pass, like almost like Men in Black, and like, you know what I mean. That does remind me of that. It looks unnatural on them, but they're trying to fit in. And
they're roaming around the town. Trying to fit in aesthetically, but they're roaming around the town, essentially like intimidating the townsfolk,
including the baker, when they go to the bakery or something, and they're like, I'd like to place my order, and they read her mind, and they're like, you don't want us to be here,
something along those lines.
And it's like, why are you, as children that are probably under the age of 8, ordering your own supplies and making food, like grocery orders and things? Like, it's just bizarre. Where are your parents? Have you already just moved out? Like, what is going on?
They don't want anything to do with them.
Because we do get to a certain point in the film where they are segregated away from population. That hasn't happened yet, though. So in my mind, I'm so confused. I'm like, why are they doing these things? Yeah. So they're not passing well. Is what I'll say.
Why don't we jump to that then? Because it's age 3 really where this really starts to take effect, where they're not just like all hive mentality, like opening boxes together. It's the behavior is really more unusual and more sinister.
Exactly. Yeah. So 3 years later, basically the professor has a meeting with British intelligence, and this is kind of assess and discuss what's been going on over the last 3 years. So this is where we're kind of briefed on the fact that this is not an isolated phenomena. This has happened in other parts of the world at the exact same time. So while this was going on in Midwich, where everyone was passed out, this was actually happening in several different locations. And I can't remember, there was one in Japan, I think there was one in Iceland, there was one in the Inuit. Then the Inuit ones were rejected immediately because they were obviously considered like demonic babies, because they didn't fit in with the the cultural and the ethnic makeup of people because of their blonde hair. So they were ultimately rejected and killed right away. They were culled. And so that's basically what's been going on around the world. There's been very unfortunate situations developing. And there was one, I think they mentioned in Sweden,
Yeah,
remember that?
and
somewhere
it's all the same. It's all the same stuff.
It all results in tragedy and it basically devolves into something else.
Right.
So yeah, so basically, where do we go from here? It's kind of devolved. So basically, Professor Zellaby's taken these children on as one of his personal projects.
Yeah.
And he asked for a year to observe and to see if he can make it work. I
Yeah,
guess
or
this
at
is
least
his human side. Or
yeah,
something.
I mean, he thinks that there might be something we can they can learn from them. That there might be, I mean, some sort of way of curing things or something, because there's just something unique here, and everyone's just seen it in a negative way.
Yeah.
But of course,
he's trying to understand.
Exactly. This doesn't last long, though. Of course,
Yeah.
Some of the classic lines that we get as well. That again, just straight up hearken to stories of the black-eyed children showing up and knocking on car windows or at doors. Quotes along the lines of, "You don't have to fear us." Well, children should never have to say that, right? Like, that just goes without saying, that you should not have to fear a child. When a child says that to you, that's like, I'm hightailing it the other way, because that's not a kid. No kid says that, right? Later on, they end up saying, you don't want us here anymore. It's what you're thinking. That's what you made a reference to that as well. When of course they're just straight reading minds.
Yeah, so they do seem like hyper aware because of their mental capabilities to the fact that they are not welcome in this town.
Right.
There's a lot of animosities building, and so that's an interesting development and also a terrifying one too, because when the townsfolk turn on them, it's almost like the classic Frankenstein thing where these kids act out and they're a lot more dangerous than their human components.
Right.
This was interesting. Okay, so basically we get one scene with the car where they basically cause the man to he calls them out for something, and then they basically like give him the steely eyes, and then he gets back in his car and runs it right into a brick wall and dies. Yeah. That's one of the first instances that kind of brings the town hall together and everyone gathers and starts blaming, and there's like a trial and all this stuff. So that I think that was the actual impetus for the rebriefing, I think, with the military, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
After that, when the professor decides to take them under his wing and takes 1 year to study and to learn from them / maybe guide them in a different direction.
Maybe.
And they're all under one roof, which seems even more dangerous. But maybe not, because they're all sequestered together, so they don't have eyes and ears everywhere.
Exactly.
So that actually makes sense. And I love that one scene that we included here. There was a quote where the professor asked them if they're aware of life on another planet.
Yes.
So he is trying to ascertain whether or not they've come from some sort of intergalactic sort of origin. Yeah. And they do not answer him, as if either they have no idea what he's talking about or they don't want to reveal that information.
Yeah, it's strange. It's not like David straight up answers like, "Oh, like, you know what we are," or something, whatever, something along those lines. They leave it open to interpretation.
And that's super suspicious. But again, I had this thought. I was like, maybe they don't even know. Maybe it's like the classic like Prometheus story, like, where it's like they were sent as seed progeny from another planet that was either since destroyed or rejected, or say it was a annihilation of a certain species.
That's interesting, actually.
Exactly. And that's why there's so much riding on their success on Earth.
Right.
Right? Because they have nowhere else to go. So especially like after the other colonies failed around the world. So they're the only pocket left. Just sitting there in Midwich. So that's high stakes, right? Yeah. So anyways, that kind of ups the ante, and I think, we're getting into climactic territory here.
For sure.
But again, so as they're exhibiting these powers to read minds and force people to do things against their will, they cause not one death, but I think 2 or 3.
Well, there's the shotgun one, there's the car.
The shotgun one, yeah.
I mean, there's a handful. Of
accidents.
There's implied more, probably, right?
The shotgun one was the most sinister, where it was the brother of the guy that died in the car accident, and he confronts them. But then it's all very like hush hush, because the professor knows what they're capable of. So he's like, just walk away, just don't say anything, just go. And then he ambles along the path but doesn't get far enough, and the black-eyed kids influence.
The black-eyed kids, yes.
As I might refer to them.
No, well, I mean, that's
what do we call them? Like, what are they?
I think we should just...
We never know.
Well, they're the spooky children for the time being, I guess.
Spooky children, all right.
I don't know. They're definitely alien-like entities of some kind, is what we're leaning towards so far. Yeah. Although I will say, actually, I didn't mention off the top, of course, the title, Village of the Damned, does imply in some sense that what they're dealing with, or what the townsfolk might believe they're dealing with is some sort of like a curse or something. Like this, like the town is cursed.
Plague or something.
It has this like direct Christian connotation to it, right? Like maybe these are demonic entities from hell, the damned, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of some kind, which is kind of curious as well.
Seeing it through, like a Christian lens, it's almost like they've all given birth to the Antichrist, if you think about it. Which is also strange because you get like almost an antithesis of that classic, like, you know, the black-haired kid that's like, you know, we get this white-haired version, which is odd and just more sci-fi-y. I
did actually, in some of our research for the Patreon episodes on the black-eyed kids, come across a couple of accounts that were allegedly the white-eyed kids. So spooky, just straight white eyes, which is really creepy as well.
Maybe they just have really bad cataracts.
Maybe.
Bad joke. That's like a dad joke.
Obviously, aliens, biological entities, is definitely where we're leaning. So the ideas of the spores, and I'm like so curious because it's like, well, why was there such a delineation? You know what I mean? Like where the plane crosses over, where there's this hard line, because it almost feels as if it's not just where the spores are landing or something. It's like it is a dome of some kind that was allowing the actual incubation to take place. You know what I mean? And also preventing anything from disturbing the incubation, because everyone that goes in just passes out.
And it's hours long, so it's like,
exactly.
That's weird.
So why did it? So did it take that long? Yeah. Like, is it or was there literal? That's the thing. It's like we're dealing with a thing like entity, like you said. Do these things? Did they even know that they're going to end up as these half children hybrid things? Like we were joking that if they landed on a planet that didn't have humans, would they end up doing this with some sort of like other organism potentially? Wow. Like would this happen with like just to stay alive biologically, like a single-celled organism? You land on the Mars or something, right?
Well, like, or even just thinking about Earth entities and Earth species, and like why did they choose humans? I guess because we have the most influence on this planet. Like what if we didn't and they chose something like a dolphin or something that's more intelligent, perhaps? Like, you know, what if they chose gorillas
in a different way? Yeah, sure.
And so they would come out looking half hybrid gorilla, half like, would they be like blonde-eyed gorilla or blonde-haired, blue-eyed?
Well, yeah, see, that's interesting. I don't think so.
I had a question too, like the idea, going back to the idea of the thing, like they're less intense, but they are merging with human DNA. So again, like, going back to it's a spore or a psychically based parasite, would they, theoretically, if they're able to grow up, would they be able to reproduce on their own?
Interesting.
You know what I mean? Like, would they have to rely on outside sources, like other humans, right? Or can they interbreed? How would they end up breeding, right? Because if it is the spore-like transference or psychic transference or something weirdly psychic biological, like how would that actually occur again? Yeah. Or is it because they've already hybridized, they will adopt the human method
biology
of procreation?
Well, that would be some really awkward sex.
It would be really strange.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, I was like, you know, like what if they chose a different host? What if they chose like cows or something?
They switched from humans to cows at a later date.
That is weird, right? There was a depiction of a cow in a field that was passed out.
Right.
So why didn't the cow get inseminated? You know what I mean?
Well, maybe there were strange cows that were born, but people were preoccupied, so they didn't even notice. And there's also that problem going on as well. Classic humanist perspective. No one notices anything. Yeah. Also, maybe the idea of like, you know, continuing to procreate or whatever. Like, obviously David is the main leader. He's like the central brain in a way, like the rest of the hive mentality, the rest of the brains are like interacting with. So in a way, he's almost kind of like equivalent to the queen, like you might call it in a hive. Like I'm using that just because we're saying hive mentality. But if we're believing this is some sort of a parasitic thing that would maybe have, but see, like that's not parasitic though. Yeah, because so to go back to the thing I didn't say off the top, right? The Midwich cuckoos, the 1950s.
One flew over the cuckoo's
nest. The cuckoos. I know. I'm sorry. It's just fun to say. It's fun to. It's fun to just. Yeah, it's like Value Village. It's like Value Village. Value Village.
It sounds so much fancier.
Anyway, it was exactly a brood parasite. That's what I didn't want to say off the top to like give it away. But that's what the novel was about. Brood parasitic entities, which are these things that need a host to bear its young, which is exactly what's happened here.
So that's interesting. So if they're pure host, or sorry, not pure host, if they're pure parasite, like they're obviously hybridized. So they have hybridized the host and the parasite. So are they like mules now? Can they not reproduce again from that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's where I'm kind of getting confused.
See, that's where I don't really get the title of this, like the cuckoos. It's like, well, the people aren't crazy. So what's going on? Like, I don't really get that title.
Maybe it's like the way, like in War of the World, or not War of the World, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. There's those two really strange species. And he like has weird names for, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but maybe it's just like that, where he calls that species. Like, it's like the Land of Oz, right?
Right, okay.
Or,
Sure.
I don't know.
I mean,
it could have just been some weird 1950s.
I mean, obviously that was the height of like all that type of sci-fi. I mean, it was really well received, and this film was really well received. Its sequel in 1995, not so much.
No.
Very, very poor reception of the sequel that took place in the U.S. It was actually directed by John Carpenter, so it was a flop for Carpenter, who we love a lot of his stuff for sure. I mean, we're coming down to the end here, but I did want to finish by talking a little bit more about the classic comparisons to the Black-Eyed Children.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's so interesting. And there's sort of two ways to think about this comparison, if you will. There's this one sort of idea that possibly this film was part of the inspiration for some of the early sightings of black-eyed kids in the UK, because this was a British-based film. Some of the earliest encounters were said to have taken place in Cannock Chase, which we talked about in our Patreon episode. So was this potentially a subconscious inspiration for the phenomena of black-eyed children in the UK, or was it maybe inspired by something that was actually happening and then was ramped up in the 80s? I don't know, because it does offer a jumping off point for one of the possible theories, if you will, of what the phenomena of black-eyed children might be. Possibly alien entities, or clearly not human entities that are trying to get something from you. They're trying to get in the house to extract something. In this case, they're a parasite, using the woman as a host. But there's so many comparisons. Like there's so many similarities. Like, obviously, we've said this already, but like the children they all look very similar. They're all similar heights and ages. They all dress exactly the same. They speak in ways that they shouldn't. They make references that are out of date. They walk in exact unison.
Distinctly unchildlike.
Distinctly unchildlike in every way. Like this is almost a dead ringer for what is described in encounters with the black-eyed children, appearing in more than one. Well, these kids are always walking around town and with more than one of them. What else? I mean, we could go on and on.
The hive. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Like
the mind control aspect, obviously, like the alleged mind control, that's come up. Hypnotic suggestion.
Or even just, emotional control. It's like a different type of mind control with a lot of the Black-Eyed Kids accounts.
Right. The only difference being that, obviously, the Black-Eyed Children is this idea that they show up and knock on doors and are asking to come inside. This isn't really that. They just are there.
Well, but if you think about it, they are asking to come inside. That's a parasitic type request, right?
Ooh.
Come inside so that we can feed off of you.
Right.
Actually, though. Because if they are extracting anything... or extracting, that's a weird word, but like if there's some sort of transference, like we talked about in our Patreon episode, the idea of fear as a unit of energy, and that this could be used by these black-eyed kids, like they're feeding off of our fear, they're feeding off of our human emotions, and inciting these like weird reactions, and then potentially having adverse health effects too on these people, like mental and physical. So
totally,
there's a lot, like. I don't know, there's a lot of parallels. And of course, like we did mention at Black-Eyed Kids, like when you Google Black-Eyed Kids, like a lot of Village of the Damned cinematography comes up and images of these kids, and they've been modified a little bit. We even used one in one of our promos.
We did,
for it because it's so effective.
Right. So we're down to the end here, and I just have a list of kind of our final ideas, because these were the most interesting aspects of this film that got us really going down a million rabbit holes with aliens, spore-like creatures, the black-eyed children. So it's this idea of, was there a literal insemination of some kind implied in this story? Or was this like almost the equivalent of abduction, lost time? Did something do this to them? Or is it just spore-like? Is it like the Thing in a way?
Wow.
It's an entity that doesn't really know what it's doing. It just is there. It's shown up on a meteor by accident.
Okay, that's interesting that you say that just now, because I love a good novel, especially like mid-century novels, and I just looked this up on Amazon. So you can buy the Midwich Cuckoos, whatever
Cuckoos. I'm sorry, I totally teed you up for that, for just me being weird today.
But what's interesting here, it says in the little synopsis, in the sleepy English village of Midwich, a mysterious silver object appears and the inhabitants fall unconscious. So that's how the novel begins. So that might seed a little bit more into what the origins are.
Okay.
I think I'm going to purchase this. And you know what? It says here, frequently bought together. One of my favorite novels. I didn't know this was actually by the same dude, though. I forgot. I read this in grade 8. It's called The Chrysalids.
Oh,
it's
yes.
amazing, by John Wyndham. Excellent book, kind of like dystopic future, kind of like after the apocalypse kind of thing.
Right.
And also bought together The Kraken Wakes by John Wyndham.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, I want to buy all 3 of these.
Yeah.
Like right now. Like it'll be $42 on the dot. I'm adding them to cart.
That's not that bad.
Audible click.
We can do it.
There we go.
There we go.
That was the click.
Sweet. But yeah, those are sort of the aspects of this movie that really got us thinking. You know, is this accidental? Is this like an intentional invasion? What you just described sounds like that, right?
Yeah.
But hey, it's all weird, man. I mean, I don't know.
It's almost like it's like a cylindrical, or not cylindrical, sorry, a circular version of the monolith that appears in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Right.
And then weird shit goes down.
And then weird shit goes down. Especially weird shit goes down.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to know what all of you guys have to think. So, post a comment on any of our social media accounts. Like, come follow us on Instagram at Into the Portal Podcast, at Into the Portal Podcast on Facebook as well. You can just shoot us an email, into the portal mailbox at gmail.com. And we definitely want to keep getting your guys' Film Friday suggestions. If you've got some other movies, we tend to like some of the older ones, but we'll review. We'll talk about whatever. So hit us up with your suggestions. And if you guys like the show and you haven't left us a review yet, please do us a solid. Leave us a 5-star review. We don't actually read them out anymore on the show, but if you send us a shot of your review or rating, we would love to hook you up with some ITP stickers and some cool stuff, because we really appreciate it. It helps people find the show.
That's really cool. We'll be doing that for a while too. So if you send us on any of our platforms, like just DM us or send us an email even, and include your address, and we can mail you some stuff.
Absolutely.
Because we want to. We have lots of stuff we want to get out in the wild. So
yes,
got that UFO diamond design. And
oh hell yeah!
We've also got I think some Thunderbird stickers kicking around. What else do we have? Like a whole bunch of stuff.
Oh man, we might have some Sasquatch ones kicking. We should order some more. We've got some cool bookmarks.
Creature.
We've got a lot of really cool stuff. So we definitely want to hook you guys up, and it really does help the show. So thank you all for listening. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. We couldn't do this without you. And big shout out and thanks to our producers, Adam Kellums, Stanley C, and Nightwing. We so appreciative.
I'm gonna do that.
You guys are the best, and all of you, thank you so much for listening to Into the Portal,
your gateway to the bizarre.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.